How dare you destroy my photographer! You idiot!
Did I kill some of your people, Murnau? I can't remember.
We have an arrangement.
Don't pretend you mourn her, Doctor. I know you.
Why him, you monster? Why not the script girl?
The script girl. I'll eat her later.
No, you will not. Our bargain. You agreed not to hurt my people. Listen to me. Do you understand? This requires that I go back to Berlin to find another photographer and then to fly him back here. And you will control yourself while I am away.
I don't think we need the writer any longer.
I don't expect you to understand this, and I am loath to admit it myself. But the writer is necessary. All my crew is necessary. Do you understand?
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fear of God podcast. We are so glad you're here for the very first formal installment of our umbrella series for the year 2020-2020. To know exactly what it's all about, go back and listen to our pre-cap episode, which is, as a matter of fact, not, unfortunately, about Captain America, from the end of January for deeper insight. But basically, you all are voting on your favorite horror films from the last 20 years, and we're covering one from each year. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey, but he was here a minute ago, and guys, it's a little unusual for him, but he got real perturbed at me and called me a Stanislavski lunatic and then stormed off. He'll be back, I'm sure. I hope. Here at The Fear of God, we explore the holy and the horrific at the intersection of faith and fear, dissecting what scares us in order to find what saves us. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, come find us on Twitter, on Instagram, or join us in the Facebook group for lively discussions around horror and genre-themed media, books, and film. At The Fear of God, we explore. We don't explain, except for right now when I'm going to explain that you can listen to the Fear of God podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, CastBox. While you're at it, subscribe to us on your favorite platform and also leave us a 5-star rating and or a glowing review. Find us on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you'll find an episode archive and be able to purchase merchandise from the show. See fellow foggers and their Fear of God merch on t-shirts, mugs, cell phone cases, pillows. We also have the one and only Reed. Hey, buddy, you're back. I'm so glad to see you. You were a little. You doing okay? It was a little testy there for a minute.
I want makeup! Give me what you promised me.
Is that Arnold in there? That definitely
it is
sounded like Arnold.
It's intended to be. It was intended to be some sort of vampiric thing, but now I think no. Now it's Arnold.
Shadow of the Arnold.
Son, I'm here for the vampire movie. I'm here for the. No, I can do it. Put me in, coach. I want to suck your blood. Right?
Okay.
Right? That's what we do.
Okay.
Listen to them,
Hey,
the children of the night.
Go get Reed, Arnold.
You try to do an impression, and they all bleed together.
They do.
Hello.
Well, it's all just, at the end of the day, it's all just Arnold.
Yeah.
Hello, my friend. It's you're my running mate this election year. I don't know if you heard, Reed. By the time this aired, the Nevada caucuses and the South Carolina primaries happened, and we won.
We won. Man,
we won.
We are sweeping.
On track.
We are the clear front runner.
We are the candidates to beat this year. Indeed.
It's our race to lose, as a matter of fact.
Oh, man, I hope we don't.
Oh, me either.
So today, Reed, we are starting the Umbrella series for the year. We're finally here. 2020, 2020.
So excited.
And to be fair, I want you to outline or should I say, I want you to enumerate, or you were Reed and or you're Arnold, but for the moment, I need you to put on your hat of Lackey the Listicle, occasionally listless making Lackey. And
should he have a voice? I can make him have a voice.
No, let's not do that, because you got a lot to say.
He can talk like this. No.
It's like a helium read.
Shouldn't have sucked on that balloon.
I know. Will you list out for listeners how they can continue to assist us in this 2020 series? Mainly because I'm super confused. Maybe it's actually for my help that I need you to tell us about this.
Regardless, either way, what you can do is go to thefearofgodpodcast.com, your home and hub for all things Foggy. At the banner at the top, you're going to see the 2020 banner. You click on that, and you will see. Now, as of this recording, of course, the year 2000 is closed down. Unfortunately, also as of this recording, the year 2001 has also closed down. So, as you're listening to this, you still have time to go and vote on the years 2002 through 2008. That concludes the first sort of wave of these years that we're covering. So, if you want your vote to count for the top 10 favorite horror films of each of those years, then go to the website, click on the banner, and then right there you'll see big numbers. You click on the year, you vote on as many of the films from that year as you want to based on your favorites, and then we will tally up the results and deliver them back to you, one list each episode, as we count through the year 2000 all the way up through where we are right now in 2020. And it's going to be really fun. We're going to spend the whole year doing it off and on, and I'm really excited. But the way you can participate is just go to the website, click on the banner, click on any of the surveys that are still listed. One way visually that you will know if a survey has already closed is if we have listed the film that we are covering from that year, then you'll know you can't vote on it anymore. But if the year just says the year, click on it, cast your vote. We'll be in good shape. So listeners,
fun.
Participate. It's really fun.
I love when a plan comes together, as it were. What's really fun about this is just seeing these lists come in and that sense memory attached to some of these films.
My gosh, yes.
And what is kind of cool, I don't know about you, but at least for today's film and next week's film, it had been a solid, 10 to 15 years since I've seen either of them.
Sure.
And how much my, it's just kind of cool having that experience of like, I have hopefully grown in maturity. And so you just have different eyes that you use to see these things with. It's kind of a fun experience.
Absolutely. So I had seen next week's film, which we'll talk about next week. I had seen next week's film a couple of times since my initial viewing of it. But this film that we're covering today, the last time I saw it was in college. So it was such a delight to be able to revisit it. Listeners, spoiler alert, we are talking, if you've seen it in the title, we're talking about Shadow of the Vampire from the year 2000 today. Won't tell you where it shows up in the lists because we'll do our countdown in just a moment. But I saw that film in college, and we'll talk about it when we get there. But I remembered being, at the time, a bit more ambivalent about it. And watching it this time around, that was definitely elevated, which of course we'll get to when we get into it. But this was very exciting. This entire exercise of revisiting some of these, many of which I have not seen since our college days and shortly thereafter, is a real delight. I'm really having a good time.
I mean, it's a little unnerving that was 20 years ago, but what
Right?
are you gonna do?
Yeah, yeah.
Just put one foot in front of the other. Hey, we before we open the door on that, I did want to shout out real quick. I thought I'd written this down in my notes, but I don't see it, and I don't want to neglect it. Big shout out to Robin Barr, who just jumped in the deep end of this whole Fear of God zaniness last week by being willing to do an interview about her piece on Joker that appeared in the Washington Post. So, Robin, thank you so much for that. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that as a little addendum on our Best of 19 series, which that was a fun series.
Oh, man, I had a blast with that.
Those
That
were
was
some
great.
good flicks.
That was absolutely great.
But we're not here for the Best of 2019 read.
No, we're not. Listeners, are you ready? Are you ready? Let's get ready to list these. All right, so we are having clearly way too much fun. So you selected them, listeners. You
Listers.
selected.
You're the lister.
I'm the listers. They're the listeners. You selected your top 10 favorite horror films of the year 2000. We are going to deliver them right now to you. We've got our top 10 up in front of us. Nathan, do you want to start with 10? Do you want me to start with 10? Which you want to do odds, evens? How do you want to do this?
I
That took way more thought than I thought.
It did. I'm like, I don't want to think about it. So I will start with 10.
Okay.
I'll start with 10. So number 10 is a film. I've probably seen maybe half of these. This is not one of them. Number 10 on the list of the best horror films as voted on by our listeners of the year 2000 is Ginger Snaps. I do like Ginger Snaps. I've just never seen the film. I like the cookie. Directed by John Fawcett.
Yes. We won't spend a ton of time unpacking each of these, but Ginger Snaps was a really... It's notable for being a werewolf film centered around two female characters, so which is pretty unique.
That's interesting. What is the title source from?
To be candid, I can't remember. It has been.
I was going to say, I was hoping it was about cookies or something. And you're like werewolf girls. Like
it
that's
is
not what I would have envisioned.
I have seen it, but it has been probably a good 15 to 20 years since I saw it. So that was, I can't remember what connection the title has to the source material. I do remember liking it, because it has been so long since I've seen it. I wouldn't be able to speak very much about specifics to it. I just remember that its place in general, that it holds a high place in the horror community for being that rare film that centers around female characters in this particular like sort of wolf-like context. I mean, the very, what the early werewolf films, the one we covered was literally the Wolf Man. So like werewolves have so frequently been identified as male characters, so Ginger Snap sort of bucks that trend. But again, I should revisit it because I remember liking it. It's just been so long since I've seen it.
All right.
Number 9 on the list is a film, I must confess, listeners, that I do not care for very much. It is a film directed by Paul Verhoeven called Hollow Man, starring Kevin Bacon. I remember seeing this film in the theater and not thinking very highly of it at the time. It's kind of this is perhaps relevant in the fact that we are imminent to the release of Universal's The Invisible Man. It's not a remake; it's like a reimagining, a new vision of The Invisible Man. But Hollow Man at the time was kind of that thing. Have you ever seen Hollow Man?
I am aware of it, and it's possible I've seen it, but I don't remember really.
Okay. I remember at the time that was sort of the big gimmick, huge technical achievements in terms of special effects and stuff. But it, I remember just not caring very much for it in terms of script and overall impact. But again, it's been a while. I just don't have very fond memories of it. I remember liking the effects and generally liking Kevin Bacon's performance, but I remember specifically feeling like the script was super, super weak. Given, with all sincerity, given that Hollow Man is on the top 10, maybe I should reconsider that and revisit it at some point, give it a little bit more credibility. But yeah, that's where I'm at with it for right now.
Number 8, directed by the one and only Bob Zemeckis. It is Forrest Gump. I mean, no, it is not Forrest Gump. Although he did direct that. It is What Lies Beneath, which I have fond memories of. I don't know how well it holds up. I remember liking it at the time of its release, and that's about all I can remember.
From my experience, I remember absolutely loving it. A very brief story. I saw this film when my family was at a convention in St. Louis, and my family was off at some of the convention festivities. I had the evening to myself, and I went out to see a movie, and I went out to see What Lies Beneath, which I absolutely loved at the time. It freaked me out. A very, very scary film to me at the time. And I remember it so indelibly because then, being in a strange city, I had to ride the subway back to our hotel room. And I was really, really freaked out that I had to do that after having watched What Lies Beneath. Now, I, with such affection for it, I own the film. And I remember a number of years ago, I watched it again. And I do remember my affection dinging down a bit on the rewatch. But even that has been some number of years ago. So I would be curious, with a fresh-eyed view, given some of the ways on Fear of God we've traversed through things, maybe I would see some different things or appreciate it a little bit differently. But I remember loving it in the theater, liking it slightly less on the rewatch, but still having some pretty fond memories of it. It's really effective. I remember my one big complaint with it in the theater is that, I won't spoil here for the listeners, there is a major reveal in the film at a certain point that the trailers spoiled. And I remember being a bit frustrated, even loving it in the theater, that so much time was spent avoiding that reveal when I knew it from the trailers. But, then I've since then learned more about the disconnect between marketing and filmmaking and recognizing how some things like that could happen. But there it is, What Lies Beneath at number 8. So number 7 is the third installment of the legendary slasher franchise Scream. It is Scream 3, directed by the one and only Wes Craven. It is the only one, for me, of the Scream franchise that I don't totally care for. I do think there's some fun things about it, and I think it's watchable, and it's got some cool things to it. But in the overall Scream franchise, I am extremely fond, even love 1 and 2. I think 4 has some very interesting things going for it. 3 is the only one that I'm just kind of meh about. Like, it's okay. I'd still watch it, but not extreme. 2000, interesting year for horror.
Yeah. Number 6 on the list is Battle Royale. Not to be confused with Battle Royale with cheese. Directed by Kenji Fukasaku, a Japanese gentleman. By name, I know nothing about this film.
So, in brief, this film was basically, I remember when The Hunger Games came out, at least for the first installment, there was a lot of sort of connective conversation about Battle Royale because it is about youths in a death arena.
Did you say youths?
No, youths. Evan, I'm trying to articulate in the microphone.
The two youths,
young people in a death arena, and so what I remember about it is that it was extremely violent. That it is very graphically violent. I remember generally kind of liking it and kind of liking the story, but being a bit off-put by the by the general violence, which is pretty extreme, if my memory serves me correctly.
And wasn't the catchphrase for that just like, may the odds be ever in your favor? Like that was
I think that was the biggest thing, that they were like, hey, isn't this... Wait, Hunger Games is... Like, what? I don't understand. The original working title for Battle Royale was Battle Mockingjay, and so it was So number 5. Number 5 is a film that honestly, peek behind the curtain, listeners, in the early voting stages ranked much higher. There was it was actually in the early voting a contender for the top spot, or at the very least the second spot. And that is directed by David Twohy, if I'm saying his name correctly, which I'm probably not. Toy or something. Give me. Do you have my toy? Where's my toy box?
No.
Oh my gosh, my apologies. I actually really like that director, but it's Pitch Black, everybody. Pitch Black, the film that for many people introduced us mainstream to Vin Diesel. I remember in our college days, Nathan, you and I had a roommate for a little while that loved this film. Very much loved this film. So Pitch Black, directed by...
That's a door. Better left closed.
Turn the light out.
Yeah. Okay. So, number 4 on the list of Best of 2000 is a film I have not seen. That is The Cell, directed by Tarsim Singh. Is this good? Have you seen it?
So visually, it's
I remember that
kind of stunning. What's weird about this film is that narratively and just in general, it's just one of those weird things where it's like, yes, it is worth seeing purely for the whacked out visuals, because visually it is incredibly remarkable. The story is a bit thin. And a bit too complex to really. It's not very coherent. But what's interesting is that director Tarsim Singh made another film that I am incredibly fond of, called The Fall, starring now the actor's name is blanking on him. Lee Pace, I think, is in that film.
Pushing Daisies Lee Pace?
Yes, yeah, Pushing Daisies Lee Pace. I believe he's in The Fall. I'm gonna have to IMDb this so I can know whether or not I'm right. But if I'm accurate, which I'll know in mere seconds, I remember loving the movie The Fall, which was by the same director. It is decidedly not a horror film, but it is definitely very, very interesting. But no, The Cell is it stars Jennifer Lopez, of all things.
Yeah, J-Lo, Jenny from the Block.
It stars J-Lo. So I am correct about the name. Looking to see if I'm correct about Lee Pace being in it. But the film was called The Fall and directed by Tarsim Singh. It's funny because I would only give a half-hearted recommendation to Lee Pace is the star of that film.
You're right. What do you know?
What do you know? A broken clock twice a day. But I would give a wholehearted recommendation myself for The Fall. I would give, at least for its visual aesthetic, a passing recommendation for The Cell, directed by Tarsim Singh. Number 3.
This threatens this whole list. It really does. It really does. I got to be honest.
I kind of get it. I kind of get it. Remember that we very clearly, and although we didn't set this up very deliberately for our listeners this time around, there is a distinction to be made between favorite and best. And this film has its fans.
Watched.
I made it through that movie.
Right.
Listeners, this is a film that we have covered before, and it is one of those rare films that we are not very fond of. So this is directed by James Wong. Your third favorite horror film of 2000 is the one and only Final Destination, which go back and listen to that episode if you want to hear us.
Like, there are miles of quality between number 3 and number 2 and 1 here. Like, there is just there is just so great a chasm.
I don't know how much it holds up, but there are miles of quality between number 3 and number 8 on this list. Let's just be honest. Well,
sure.
Yeah. But I will say this. In defense of Final Destination, like it is, and I think I said this on the episode, it is B movie fodder fun. Like it's ridiculous in a bunch of ways, but its premise is inventive. There are some reasons why I would understand it rising in the ranks to reach the number 3 spot. But I know you are not very fond of it, so there's that.
What are you gonna do? Yeah. You are going to move on to number 2 on the list, and that is our topic of consideration today. Shadow of the Vampire, directed by Elias Marriage. And the only reason I do know it is Marriage is from the behind the scenes stuff.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Yeah, so we are covering that film today. We'll have plenty to say about it in the coming minutes.
All right.
Or so. What about number one, Reed?
So here it is, the moment you've all been waiting for. Your number one favorite horror film of the year 2000. Honestly, when I saw this rise to the ranks, it made so much sense. It is a film we have already covered, which is why we're not covering it today. But directed by Mary Harron, it is the one and only American Psycho. You got to return those videotapes. I want to spend just a couple of minutes, not long, but I want to spend just a couple of minutes before we leave this segment. Now the list is all in front of you. Part of what we want to examine while we're exploring this in broader context is the reason these films are the favorites of 2000. Obviously, our listeners have made their selections, but these are the films that were notable and popular at the time. So what was it about this year that sort of drives these kind of stories? And I want to focus for a moment, even though we did a whole episode about it, on American Psycho for a minute. When you think about it, coming into the new millennium, I mean, we all remember the Y2K scare, and there had been this sensibility of, like, it's a rise of sort of corporate power and corporate entities. There's a lot of films in the late 90s about, substantial money-making schemes and everything. So I find it really interesting that American Psycho hit so hard with our listeners and, is noted as, like, the film of 2000, because it really is this counter statement to all of the superficial, the facetious sort of sheen and all of the violence and the greed and the corruption that lies underneath that basic veneer. And I do think that's something that, as we move into even the film we are covering, Shadow of the Vampire, is going to show up as well, just in terms of, I think people at this time seem to be very concerned with these images of falsehood and these sort of fake. I mean, look at, I keep coming back to it, look at number 8 on the list is a film called What Lies Beneath, and is an element in that story about deception and about something not being what it appears to be. I think there's also some considerations to make about something like Final Destination, silly as we may think the film is, just about this inevitability of destruction that comes and the ways you can't escape the reckoning that is on your doorstep. So there's some interesting things going on in this list, some things that I don't know, they pique my interest in terms of what we were concerned with and concerned about in terms of horror in the year 2000. What are your general thoughts on some of these films? I know you've only seen about half of them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't kind of at first glance, it's hard to wrestle down a consistent sort of like through line on these. I do think there's a lot happening in American Psycho for sure. I'd be curious, and I haven't done this homework, to know, because Shadow of the Vampire still feels like an off the beaten path film. You know what I mean? Like, true. I'd be curious how it kind of ranked in terms of, kind of box office, if you will, as a metric for the given year. And so it's hard to look at that one necessarily as representative, but I do agree with you that some of these running themes of veneer and manipulation and the real explicit what lies beneath idea. I mean, to a certain degree, a lot of that's going to be just general horror fodder, but I do think it really does stand out that American Psycho tops this list.
Yeah.
Partly as, this is the film was released, I think, in 2000, of course, but kind of. I don't know when the book released, but it is itself a reflection on the 80s American culture,
right.
And so you've got this span of, let's say, 15 years between 85 and 2000 that are kind of under the microscope in that film,
right? Yes.
So no, I do think there's some interesting stuff to be found there. It would just, like I said, be kind of hard, having seen only about half of them, to find some consistent whatever.
So can I make an observation that's just coming to me in the moment, real time? There's a huge wave of 80s nostalgia right now.
Right.
You can see it in Stranger Things and in so many films and soundtracks that have come out recently. There's a huge wave of 80s nostalgia. It is really interesting to me that it literally just clicked together when you said it is kind of a satirical indictment. Those weren't the words you used, but of the 80s. And next week's film is too, which I think is really, really interesting. And that's something that I wouldn't have necessarily gelled together. Listeners will be announcing this more concretely at the end, but next week's film, again, not revealing where it ranks in the list, but we're covering Donnie Darko next week, which is also a film kind of critiquing the late 80s. And it's interesting to me that the number one film this year that we're covering, or not that we're covering, but that's on this list, is American Psycho, an indictment of the 80s in a way. And then Donnie Darko, in many ways, is of a similar framework. So I think clearly the people coming of age at that time, the filmmakers coming of age at that time, were working through some things from that era and were trying to sort of work out some of the perhaps hypocrisy, perhaps something that they saw as a more malevolent subversion. I don't know. That's just very, very interesting to me to consider.
If we can, maybe adopting this concept moving forward through our 2020s here. It's interesting, horror as a microcosm of the film industry as a whole. But like I just pulled up Box Office Mojo top grosses of 2000. And this is fun. It's fascinating because I was looking at the list. And so, for instance, the top film, which I'll tell you what it is in a minute, but the amount of money it made is $250 million. And it's funny because I keep looking around the page like, surely this is not right, because of how much inflation and worldwide release has affected. Like, you take, this is just coming to me in real time, but like Joker made $1 billion.
Right.
So
right.
I can't. I'll do a little more digging because this is really on the fly to know, is this international box office? Nope. That was domestic. So I am actively going to worldwide to see where. Okay, here we go. Even still, top. You can leave all this in because it's finding this stuff in real time. So top film of worldwide in 2000 was still only $540 million.
Wow. Versus,
isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is nuts.
I mean, that's
nuts.
a wild gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the top 5, this is weird, and that list just changed dramatically going from domestic to worldwide box office.
Interesting.
Top 5 box office grossed films in 2000. Number 5 was Dinosaur.
Whoa, the Disney film?
Right.
That's crazy.
Was it Disney? I don't know. It's like that.
I believe it's Disney.
I don't know. Number 4 was What Women Want.
Was
Jack
that
Nicholson?
No. What Women Want isn't.
That's Mel Gibson.
It's Mel Gibson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mel
Jack
Gibson
Nicholson is the
As Good as It Gets.
Yes, you're
That's
right.
from '97.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Number three is Castaway. Great flick.
Okay.
Yeah,
a Bob
this is
Zemeckis
fun.
film. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Well, interestingly, number 6 is How the Grinch Stole Christmas, which is also Bob Zemeckis, right? Isn't that
that's
Jim
Ron
Carrey?
Howard. No,
Okay,
it's
right.
Jim Carrey, but it's Ron Howard.
I'm going to stop saying things because I'm really wrong.
I'm surprised I know all this. Normally I have to look this stuff up.
Number 2 on the list is Gladiator.
Okay, that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
And then number 1 on the list was Mission Impossible 2, which is wild.
Whoa, John Woo's film. Wow.
Right, because interestingly, juxtapose that. I've told this story before. I don't know on pod or not, but as a fun little, movie history, whatever. Number 9 on this list is the first X-Men film. Well, the relationship between the first X-Men film and MI2, the John Woo one.
Uh-huh.
Do you know this story? About
Well, yeah, because the guy
Doug Ray Scott.
Doug Ray Scott was going to be Wolverine.
Yes,
and then I forget if he got fired or dropped out
No, I think he dropped out to take Mission Impossible 2.
Right, and then
they
Hugh
went
Jackman
with Hugh Jackman, and here we are 20 years later, and everybody's like,
gosh.
Doug Ray who? Yeah. That's wild.
Right.
That's cool. That's fun. So top 3 of 2000 box office gross worldwide is Castaway, Gladiator, and Mission Impossible 2.
So I want to make one comment, and then I'm going to make a request, and then we'll get into today's film. So my comment is just this is interesting to me. I only know this bit of trivia because I found it so fascinating at the time. Castaway. The reason Bob Zemeckis made 2 films in 2000, Castaway and What Lies Beneath, is that if anybody has seen Castaway, you know that Tom Hanks gets stranded on an island, and when he gets stranded there, he is a little hefty. He's not, I wouldn't say overweight, but he's a hefty individual. And then they show after the passage of time that he has dramatically slimmed down. Well, Tom Hanks, the actor, needed time to do what he needed to do to get that weight off, and so they didn't want a disruption in the look or feeling of the film, so Zemeckis hired the entire same crew to go make What Lies Beneath while Tom Hanks was taking the weight off for Castaway. And so that's
they wouldn't
why
have to release that creative team.
Exactly. And so so he made sure that they had jobs through. So it is literally the exact same creative team that made Castaway that also made What Lies Beneath. Obviously, a different cast.
You are a cornucopia
of useless knowledge,
esoteric film knowledge.
Oh man,
I love it. All right. So, what was your question?
Oh, my request is.
Oh, request. Yeah.
This is going to be hard to do because now we've breached this. But that was so fun for me. Can we do all of our box office lookups online? Let's not do any preliminary research. Can we look at?
Yeah, you mean in real time? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So let's look up the box office grosses that you did. Let's do that every episode, but let's do it in real time on the recording rather than look beforehand and prepare.
That's fine with me.
That was really fun.
That was a fun discovery.
I was like, oh, what is that? What is that? So,
it was like the old days when you and I would go to a video store and be like, hey, have you seen that? And you're like,
gosh, it did feel
we'd
like
reminisce.
It did feel like that. Oh man, pour a cold one out for Blockbuster. That used to be why it took Nathan and I would wander around the video store for like the length of a movie trying to decide what we wanted to see, and then we would just look at the shelves and be like, "You see that movie? You see that? Yeah."
And then you got to talk about it for a few minutes. You're like, this choice and that choice.
It was so great.
Yeah.
Those were the days, man. Those were great.
All right.
Okay,
yes.
but here we are. We probably would have had a conversation about American Psycho, but again, we already covered it. Go back and listen to that. That was a good episode. We're proud of it. But we are here to talk about Elias Marriage's Shadow of the Vampire. I will just piggyback on a comment that I made first, and then I want to hear your history with this film in general. I remember watching it in college, and a lot of our mutual peers were very affectionate towards it. And I remember not being terribly... I didn't dislike it, but I remember watching it and walking away kind of going, that was okay. That was all right. But then like it's garnered a lot of esteem over the years. And so then in rewatching it for this, which I believe was only my second viewing of it, I was far more fond of it. Edging into... I mean... Love would be a strong statement to make about my current feelings for it, but
love is a strong statement, and
it is.
You need to be, you carry that with sensitivity.
So. Well, and even more than that, love is a verb. I mean,
it is. I don't care what you say.
Good job. Good job.
I
met a girl. She looked at me so
God! Oh my god! That was before 2000.
It was.
That was about 10 years before 2000.
See, listeners don't know that I could right now, this minute, I believe, do that entire rap.
I could.
No.
We won't do that in real time.
But again, watching it for this film, I really enjoyed it. What was your history with this? Had you only seen it once before? What was?
I'm pretty sure this was at least 3. I don't remember the original context, though.
Okay.
The way to hear you paint that, it was probably amidst theater peers from our college days. I have recollection of watching it after that era as well, but similar time, similar early 2000s. And when, in my memory, I enjoyed much more of what I would consider the black comedy aspects of it.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And rewatching it, the last 20 minutes, not even the last 20 minutes, because it's a relatively short film, which I was thankful for when I started at about 10 o'clock the other night. But the last, 15, I mean, the last set piece, right?
Yeah. The final filming scene. Yeah.
Yeah. I found deeply unsettling in a way that didn't quite resonate with my, I suppose, less mature self of 20 years ago. So no, I mean, I think it's a weird film, and I kind of love that about it. I think,
yeah.
I do think it's incredibly funny in a real dark, since. And we'll get into some of that. But I did want to shout out real quick. This is less trivial bit and more just kind of share the love here. So we alerted listeners, and despite the fact that this is an opening episode for a massive year-long coverage, it'll probably be our least listened to episode of the year because this movie's not available anywhere.
Not digitally.
So you can't get this film digitally, but like I did with, what was it? One other film in the last 6 months or so. Shout out to VisArt Video in Charlotte, North Carolina, one of the very few video stores, period, anymore. I called them and I was like, "Hey, do you have Shadow of the Vampire?" They said, "Yes." And they held it for me, Reed.
Aww.
Yeah. And so I rented the
important.
formal version. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So just shout out to VisArt in Charlotte. Yeah.
Thank you, VisArt. We should clarify that as of prepping for this recording and as of this recording, it's not available digitally. It was funny because when I looked that up just to make completely sure that it wasn't, I did find out that there were a couple of those free ad service film streaming sites that had previously had it, so it is possible that in a given number of months or over time, it will then become available digitally. We will try our best to sort of keep our eye on that, and if it becomes digitally, maybe reshare the episode or re-ping people back for it if you haven't been able to.
But you found it through your library system.
Yes, support your local library. I found it through my local library system, a very clear, crisp DVD copy. So yeah, definitely. Or if you're lucky enough to have, as Nathan does in VisArt, a local video store, then give them some of your patronage and rent this film because it's worth a watch.
What do you want? How do you want to enter this film, Reed?
So I feel like, and you and I kind of pre-briefed a little bit just about how much is going on thematically. I think this is an opportunity. We can certainly mention a thing or two along the way, but I think this is one where we kind of want to dive in to theme pretty early because there is so much, I think, going on. You already alluded to sort of the segment of those last 15 minutes. If you will permit me, I've got 2 notes for trivial bits.
Sure, please.
And then just one sort of passing thing that I absolutely love that I want to mention. But other than that, we can sort of dive in if you want. So I did not remember at all. I don't even know if I would have caught it in the moment. And if you watch the behind the scenes stuff on the DVD, then you saw this even more substantially. But Nicolas Cage is a producer of this.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild? And I saw his name in the credits, and then if you pick up the DVD copy of it, chances are strong he will have a little 8-minute, behind the scenes sort of unpacking of it, which I thought was pretty great. And I don't know if you picked up in your trivial research that this role was directly responsible for landing Willem Dafoe the part of Green Goblin in Spider-Man, which I thought was really cool.
I did see that. I thought what you're about to say is the role was specifically written for him,
which is true. Yes. I had come across that as well. That's kind of the extent of my trivial.
Spider-Man.
Oh, I had completely forgotten that Carrie Elwes is in it. When he shows up, I was like, "What?"
So great.
He's wonderful.
You were like, "What? No."
I was like, "What? No, really?" I rewound it. I told the room around me. I was like, "Do you see this?" I have to mention, and I don't want to shut down any particular elements of the film that you want to point out, but I must give a shout out to what I think may be one of the best scripted lines in any film we're going to cover in this series, which is this: "In my old age, I feed the way old men pee. Sometimes all at once, sometimes drop by drop." That is, I'm going to slow clap that line. That is an insane line. Who's sitting there writing it like, "I feed the way old men pee"? Like, what? Really? Okay.
Yeah,
and yet it kind of works. It's pretty brilliant. So I just have to sing the praises of the urination line.
I mean, I do think you're identifying something that's representative of just the general strength of this film. Is if I were to be asked right now about recommendations, I certainly would recommend it.
Yes,
it might be a little weird, if you're expecting some real kind of straightforward,
right,
little story, but I think the premise is so friggin' brilliant.
Oh, it's
I mean,
absolutely.
it is. I love it. I love the setup for that. Like, even watching it, you're like, this is so dang smart.
Yeah,
like,
it's great. It's great.
As a pure idea, to follow through on that. But
will you summarize after you finish your thought? Will you summarize the film?
I mean, specifically, it is set in 1921, I believe, and is meant to be a what if version of the real world director Murnau's Nosferatu, the filming of the movie Nosferatu from that same year.
Yes.
And I could be wrong, but I think they use some actual footage from Nosferatu.
I don't know if
least...
they. So what I have seen is, following the film, there's a YouTube video out there that has a side-by-side comparison of the Nosferatu film with the recreations in Shadow of the Vampire, and it is at times pretty spot on. Most of the time, they made some different affectations, and you can clearly tell, even if the actors are different, you can clearly tell some different staging. But I was pretty impressed. There was some. They did their homework on the film. I will say that, just in terms of how they crafted the shots.
Yeah, and so the setup there is the studio that made Nosferatu couldn't get the rights, or was denied the rights to Bram Stoker's Dracula, so made their own film,
which is true, by the way.
Called it Nosferatu, and the character is Count Orlok, and the real world film Nosferatu, Orlok is played by the actor Max Schreck, and so the setup of Shadow of the Vampire is, what if the actor, and I believe there was even some urban legend around this, so it wasn't completely original to the film.
Oh my gosh.
But what if Max Schreck, the actor, was actually a vampire?
Yeah.
So Malkovich plays this director who knows this secret, but is so hell-bent on creating his work of art that he does not alert any of his, especially cast. And I think by the end of it, some crew folk are very in on the bit, but just the kind of devastating ramifications that are wrought by him withholding this knowledge. And so when I say the premise is so brilliant, it's just, you take your real world vampire film, and it's like, well, what if they actually got a vampire to be in it? And just a really great setup. And so so my main, if we're doing likes, dislikes, even scantly, it's the premise and Dafoe. Oh my gosh.
Willem Dafoe.
I mean,
oh my goodness.
In general, like, I joked with you, we're going to pair this film with Lighthouse or some other Dafoe adjacent horror and call it The Friend Dafoe series. But everything about his Shrek is just perfect.
It's amazing.
The costuming, his actual performance is just, when people talk about Willem Dafoe, it's roles like this that are illustrative of what he's capable of, which is a lot. He is a really fantastic performer.
Almost limitless. Like, people give a tremendous amount of praise, and as they should, to the chameleon actors of, like, the Daniel Day-Lewis's or even the Gary Oldmans, the Christian Bales, where they, dramatically transform their appearances and everything. And Willem Dafoe's not quite in that camp, but it is hard for me to think of an actor more completely and boldly committed to his performances than Willem Dafoe. And this is a perfect example of that level of craftsmanship. And he is just a staggering talent.
And again, it's just, it's baked into the premise, but why I keep referring to this kind of black comedic aspect to it is watching the character Max Schreck attempt to perform as an actor playing the role of Count Orlok in Malkovich/Murnau's Nosferatu is hysterical. It is his body language and physicality. This film has been out 20 years. I am not making this up. My brother and I, for years, would mimic the the hands down signaling that he does in the scene. That's just a thing we would do, is like, if you're indicating to someone, you just do the stuff, and the when he clicks his fingernails together. But no, his physicality, his performance is I don't know. I didn't even look this up. I don't know if it got nominated for anything, but it is award worthy, if not actually winning things. I mean, he's amazing.
I don't think. No. If memory serves, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to look this up. If memory serves, I think it got Academy Award nominated for makeup, and I believe he got a supporting actor nomination. I would need to verify that in brief, but I'm pretty sure
this whole 2020 is just going to be you and I being like, I think
really?
19 years ago
maybe
that this thing happened. Hang on, let me look it up. I remember things like old men pee. Sometimes all at once, sometimes drip by drip.
Exactly. But no, I'm pretty confident that he got nominated for support. I know even if he did not get Academy Award nominated, that he received a tremendous, overwhelming amount of praise for the role, because he really is. I mean, and let's not take anything away from the stellar John Malkovich, who is absolutely, he's a completely competent and capable actor, nominated for 2 Oscars, one of which was Willem Dafoe as supporting actor. So John Malkovich is obviously very steady and amazing in his lead performance, but Willem Dafoe is just a force of nature. I can't get away from that phrasing.
Yeah.
He's incredible in this. It's worth the recommendation just to watch an actor act. Like, he is outstanding. I do not feel that we can do justice in our rave about his performance. You have to see what he's doing and how fully committed to it he is. It's really outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, so that kind of covers my broad likes, dislikes.
So I'd like to get into some of just what this film has on its mind, and particularly a lot of it is baked into the last 30 minutes or so, particularly the last 15, but a lot of it sort of starts to come to the surface. As we've already expressed, listeners, the premise of the film is that Malkovich's character, F.W. Murnau, has made a pact with this very real vampire who he is calling Max Schreck, and in his film is Count Orlok. And he has made this pact for the vampire to be in his film. They've reached a kind of a bargain, but things begin to be a bit unbridled. He begins to lose control of the vampire, as he can't keep the vampire from, shall we just say, feeding on the crew, and then eventually at least one member of the cast, and so he can't keep that at bay anymore. And one of the things that I found so arresting, there's a line towards the end of the film. I want to invite both of us to just sort of feel the freedom to bounce wherever we intend to bounce as we're unpacking this film's theme. But there's a line towards the end of the film where, in this final 15 minutes that Nathan and I keep referencing, basically it has come to light that the vampire has been promised. I don't know any other way to say this. F.W. Murnau in the film got the vampire to make this movie by promising him one of his actors, specifically Greta, who plays the female lead in his fictional film. And he promised that Orlok could basically have her forever if he would be willing to do this thing. It was not clear to me in the film if Murnau did that to get the vampire involved and then had some version of plan to get out of that contract, or if he actually intended to offer this actor up as payment for the vampire's involvement. But this all kind of comes to light, and the last 15 minutes is a plan by the relevant pivotal crew members involved, the director, the cameraman, and I forget Udo Kier, the scriptwriter. Udo Kier, is he the screenwriter? No, because the screenwriter,
He's a producer.
He's a producer on it. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's it. So a producer, the cameraman, and the director basically decide that during the filming of the scene, they are going to entrap the vampire and like raise the latch, bring in the sunlight, and destroy the vampire so that they can all be free from this bargain that the director has made. But those last 15 minutes, the vampire has kind of stumbled onto their plot and has destroyed the chain that will raise and let the sunlight in. And so the last 15 minutes are pretty harrowing because now they are locked in with this vampire. But there's a moment where, pretty much everybody else in the room is dead except for Count Orlok and the director. And as Orlok is menacingly approaching him, the director, I don't know any other way to put it, continues to direct him. And he follows direction where he says like, no, back up. And he says something that just arrested me so much. He said, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. And at one moment, things began to fire off in my spirit about this idea that I feel dramatically insufficient to express in the moment of the ways in which it is possible for people who have an agenda. It is possible for people who have a need and a desire to coercively manipulate individuals to their own chosen ends, to enlist the aid of monstrous forces, and to basically conscript monstrous and wicked things that they then the statement is, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. That then anything that would be contrary to their goal, anything that would be contrary to their aim, anything that would be subversive to the manipulation after which that they're pursuing is discarded, dismissed. It is as if it doesn't exist. In other words, if it doesn't fit this thing that I am pursuing, then it does not exist. And I know that's a bit of a bumper sticker of an idea, but something about that so arrested me in the ways people will try to control and manipulate monstrous things and create monsters in the minds of the people they're trying to manipulate. And then anything to the contrary, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. If it's not in line of sight of this story we're concocting, then it's not true. It doesn't exist. And yes, there are social ramifications to that. There are political ramifications to that. Listeners are savvy enough to know some of what I'm pursuing, but I'm trying to stay general as the principle, although we can get very specific if we need to. But that was what I really took away, was this concept of, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist, as a means to dismiss and discredit anything that does not fit your perceived narrative, because your perceived narrative is your means of power and control and coercive manipulation at work.
I'm going to change one of those words there. I won't say perceived narrative. I think more appropriately there, and I think you'd agree, is imposed narrative. Right?
Yes, I would. Yes. Yeah.
Man, you're in my lane, Lackey. In a good, I mean that positively.
Sure.
So, chicken, egg, cart, horse, who knows how these things align with each other, but it's not uncommon for something I'm reading to sort of echo into some of these things we talk about. And
sure.
I just picked up a book about a week ago, and this is getting into sort of substantiating all that you're trying to say here, but I'm going to cite the book and then go where you're at. So the book is called, the title of it is Antisocial. And the subtitle is Online Extremists, Techno-Utopians, and the Hijacking of the American Conversation.
Wow.
Yeah. It's probably not a healthy read. Unlike you are a very healthy read. Which might not be true either. Right. But the author is a guy named Andrew Marantz, if I'm saying that right. He's a New Yorker journalist, and basically the setup for the book is it's a powerful text. And in fact, how I described it to someone recently was, it feels like a textbook of our moment. Like it cites as ground zero kind of the architecture built by Silicon Valley in the form of social media, and how what was perceived as innovation has just blobbed into this cesspool of of bad faith actors. And where I'm going with this is, so from the film, the note I wrote that syncs up pretty well is just as a general idea here, the manipulation of reality, typically by bad faith persons to achieve a desired perception, almost inevitably releases a monster, which is very in line with what you were saying. And and it's fascinating, even using that quote of if it isn't in the frame, it doesn't exist. So this book, this journalist Marantz, he tags along, as the journalistic trade is wont to do with, I'm not going to name these folks here just because it's not worth publicizing who they are, because I think so little of them, but a lot of these online personas that are effectively trolls of our day, right? Like just dominating the Twitter sphere and the social media environment. And so he tags along with these people for the last 4 or 5 years, and writes kind of from this vantage point of all the things that we take for granted as the upper crust of the social media world. He is at the core as it gurgles up, right? And so it's really fascinating and kind of harrowing from that standpoint. But he is this eminent, the writer is this eminent kind of pragmatist, and I promise this is going to tie back into the film and where you're at, but
sure.
Early in the book, and I'm about, according to my Kindle, about 67% of the way through it. Early in the book, he subverts the famous MLK quote that the arc of history bends towards justice, right?
Yeah.
And he reframes it. And he says, the arc of history bends the way people bend it. Yeah. And I was like shook. I was like, this is as eminently true as it is devastatingly scary. Right. And, it's interesting watching this film, and why I grew so unsettled at the end this time around is, and you hear these stories over the years, right? These Hollywood stories of people like let's say like a Woody Allen or Roman Polanski or something like this. These folks who have reputations, right, for imposing harrowing film conditions to achieve something on film, right? And Woody Allen may be unfair to throw in there. I don't know every of these stories, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so there's this in Murnau, this purity of artistry, right? Like I'm going to get this artistic cinematic achievement that is ungettable except through this fashion.
Right.
And in so doing, not just unleashes a monster, but causes active and immediate harm to the people around him. And I know it feels like these are hard to entwine here, and that's because they're hard to entwine, and because these are really big ideas. But for lack of a better aggregating phrase, I'm going to refer to the trolls, right? These figurehead trolls of the internet, blogosphere, Twitter sphere, social media sphere these days. You even added a new layer of it with this quote of, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. If it doesn't fit their disruptive intentions, and I'm not even doing justice to the story embedded in this book of how the current political moment is born of these actions and actors. But if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. Even our very language, Reed, is rendered moot by the subversive and ironic nature. In other words, in the film or in art making, it's malevolent intention to achieve an artistic goal. In the real, it's disruption purely for the intent of disruption. But in that environment, even the attempts to challenge based on compassion, logic are rendered moot because the whole point is irony and disruption. In other words, if it's not in the frame, it doesn't exist. It doesn't matter what you say, Reed, because this is the end I'm after, and all of your more moralistic propositions are as nothing to me because I didn't mean it anyway. To make a really direct phrase, oh, it's just locker room talk. It doesn't matter, Reed. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's this pervasive nullifying, negating of good faith intent, right?
Yes.
In the spirit of achieving a very twisted end goal.
Right.
And so that's all freestyling. Hopefully this is syncing up a little bit. It felt like it was in sync with where you were going.
Yeah,
so
no, it is.
In this, the arc of history bends the way people bend it, which is prophetic and devastating. Just a few notes here to spring us into maybe some other conversation. What I wrote is the reason MLK could quote it his way, which is the arc of history bends towards justice, is because he represented a population who demanded justice for their own suffering. In other words, he was bending it, right? He on behalf of an oppressed and suffering population group was bending history towards justice. And what I wrote here is, but what happens when a population in the film, an artist, bends things because they want to disrupt or fracture or break?
Right.
It will bend that direction. You have your Bryan Stevensons of the world who are bending reality towards justice, yes, towards equality, and that work is slower and more painstaking and will fail more than it will succeed.
Right.
And then you have these do you know what 4chan is? I don't even like saying these words out loud, but 4chan, it's this like deep dark corner of the internet. Anyway.
No.
Right. So denizens of that hole are 4chaners. You've got those folks, neo-Nazis, alt-righters, they bend reality purely towards the breaking of it. And in so doing, their methods and values set, such as it is, gurgle to the top of society and install a figurehead, release a monster.
Yeah, right.
With an agenda. Reality will bend the way we bend it. It is your intentions that determine which direction the bending steers. And as a last sort of written note, but pivoting in, kind of direction here, this is why, like, I know these things seem like, Nathan, you're hijacking Shadow of the Vampire to talk about this book you're reading. No, these are all echoing against each other, right? Like rebounding off of each other.
Absolutely.
And I was so unsettled by the Malkovich's character's active intention to bend towards his own self-serving needs. As a final note here, and then we can just converse, what I wrote is, it's why, and I wrote in quotes, I'll be in heaven anyway, or I'm going to heaven anyway type of mentality to me
right.
is just pure self-centeredness. It's pure self-centeredness, and it is divorced from the Spirit of Christ because, and as I try to unpack this, the arc of history will not of its own design bend towards justice.
Right.
It will not.
Yeah.
It is not a thing that just will happen. Now, eschatologically, perhaps, sure, maybe.
Yeah.
But the present does matter, and we release ourselves over. We let the Murnaus of the world do whatever they're gonna do, because in our heads, oh well, it's gonna be fine in the end. Or, yeah, please. Yeah.
Listeners don't know that Nathan saw me do a very physical affectation when he just said it. I was trying to hold off because I didn't want to disrupt your thought. Eschatologically, yes, maybe it will, but I want to be really crystal clear to pivot back to something earlier that you said about, let me just spit out my thought.
Yeah.
That he commissioned us to do it. Right. He challenged us to do it. He left us to do it. And I feel like one of the elements of eschatology and this so heaven-minded that you're no earthly good kind of trite idea, but the real substance behind it is, I'll be in heaven someday. I don't have to worry about it. That is, quote-unquote, not my problem. you said earlier, I cannot quote it verbatim, but it is so contrary to the Spirit of Christ and so contrary to the call and commission with which we are meant to frame the world around us and meant to address the world around us. I feel like it is this. I do not feel that Christ in his time on earth looked very kindly on people who washed their hands of the problems of those around them.
Right.
I'm just being observant of the text of the Scripture.
Sure.
I don't feel like he was very affirming of, yeah, you just, you do you, boo. Like, you go on. You just be whatever it is you're going to be. I feel like instead he was prompting and calling and in some cases demanding engagement and demanding attention and
But I do think there are some red letters that say "You do you, boo." I mean,
that's. Oh man, put that on a.
Oh man,
put that on a bracelet, not WWJD.
Yeah.
It's
you do you, boo.
It's YD.
That's in 2 Corinthians.
YDYB. So, but my point being that you talk about the arc of history has to be bent. I deeply believe, and I'm going to just tap dance a little bit on my personal understanding of theology. I deeply believe in the sovereignty of Christ and the sovereignty of God. I also deeply believe in taking seriously his commission for us to transact that. Now, I don't like using the word transact, so I'm trying to find one that's a little bit better. Enact it, embody it, like his commission to us to go and be and go and do. You're my hands and my feet, he said. Like, you're the ones. I've told you to go do this. You've seen me do this thing. You're going to do even greater things than that. Now go and do it. And I feel like there is this, what was the parable where he talked about, he said, if your master leaves you to tend a vineyard and he returns, shouldn't he return finding you doing what he left you to do? And I think so many times it can be easy for people, we'll get back to something in Shadow of a Vampire in a second, but I think it can be very easy for people to wash their hands and absolve themselves of the responsibility to be attentive and be engaged with the needs that surround them, because it's all just going to happen. The Lord's just going to make it work, and it's like what a devastating thing to me. For me personally, Reed, I'm just going to speak for me. I'm not going to speak for the church. I'm not even going to speak for fear of God. But what a devastating thing for me to get to the end and be like, yes, Lord, I know and I believed that you were going to do this and you were going to enact this and that you were going to see this make its way into the world. And for the Lord to look back at me and is like, well, I put you there to to assist with that. Like I fearfully and wonderfully made you. Now, I do want to be clear. I want to backpedal a little bit on I am simultaneously very attuned to the need for us to simply be aware of our belovedness without responsibility of, that like this transaction does not coerce God's love for us, that it is not just about, like we don't earn God's love through this thing. But I do feel like there is a commission that it's like once we know that we're responsible to go and do, and to feel otherwise is to miss the point. And to feel otherwise is to miss out on so much of our intrinsic purpose and mission to live out what he has done for us and in us.
Yes, and rarely it's... So Reed and I, in prepping for this episode, we're basically like, okay, we don't totally know where this is going to go, but maybe we skimp on the likes scares and service to the themes, and goodness gracious. So to be fair, we rarely get this high theology, but for anyone who is unaware, when we say things like eschatology, that is historically meant to be kind of end times type of theology and conversation. So the statement we were effectively making is, sure, does in the eternal view the arc of all time bend towards a redemptive purpose in the consummation of Christ in creation? Yes. Let's honor and give proper deference to that. However, what I was trying to position, and what I think you're sort of articulating now as well, is the problem, and it is an monstrous problem is we have for a very, very long time, by omission and by active commission, decided that that is enough, and kind of abdicated our role in redeeming the creation around us. And I'm with you, like, by no means, I mean, I think most people that a lot of Christians don't think are deeply beloved and are all welcome at the table. All I'm trying to get at and work towards in my daily comings and goings is bearing responsibly the weight of ambassadorship, right? Like of
Yes.
Christ representation. And this, this conversation is the first time I'm articulating my response to this film. And so some of this stuff is pre-written, some of it is coming in real time. But Reed, you talk about complicity and in the frame existence and intentionality. Reed, we are permitting monsters to molest our wives and daughters and sisters, and those of less fortune and privilege around us, while we watch and record and broadcast.
I know.
And we say, well, I'm sure it's probably fake, or that's the libs. That's the GOP, whatever. We write it off and mentally impose cognitive dissonance between what we know is occurring and what we don't want to believe is real.
Yeah.
And so what that then does is just absolves us and lets us go about our daily life. And, I'm sure it's fine. It's fine. Because I'm going to heaven, or whatever sort of pithy, personal, shallow, faithless religion we've ascribed ourselves to. Sorry.
Yeah.
But it's just stirred up by, and I, what's amazing is at any given moment, we're a different one of these players. The observer or the instigator, the monster or the assaulted.
Yeah.
I think our intention is to exist outside of all of those roles once we can own and carry with maturity and compassion our Christ-likeness and redeem, pull out the assaulted and call to account the instigator and the monster and banish them from our very realm, to get real weird.
So a couple things. Shadow the Vampire. 2020.
I didn't know. Yeah.
So many things. So the first thing that comes to mind, the most prominent thing, is something that I have been very passionate about. I may have even articulated at an earlier episode at some point. When I read the passage of Scripture that says faith without works is dead, I know that so often people will distort the conversation and the meaning about that to mean like, well, is it works-based or is it faith-based, And I think what the book of James is articulating there when it says that faith without works is dead is identifying and diagnosing that, like, you can say you have faith. If it does not produce things in your life, it is deceased. It is dead. It is not active, vibrant, and alive within you. I don't view it as this condemning kind of, if you don't. In other words, like, pivoting back to what we were saying earlier is to put it very blunt and personal, we can't all be the Bryan Stevensons of the world, but we're not all called to be. And I feel like sometimes when you look at the daunting task of bending towards justice,
Mm-hmm.
you could say like, well, I don't know how to be Bryan Stevenson. Well, good news is you don't have to be Bryan Stevenson.
Right.
But what you can do, and we touched on this a bit in our conversation last week, what you can do is be attentive and pay attention to the world around you and see ways in which, because it has become so much more a part of my conversation, that element where the Lord assured that giving something as simple and small as giving a cup of cold water in His name would reap reward. And I can recall a personal story. I remember, so my grandfather was a pastor and a preacher for most of his life, almost all of his vocational life. That was what he did. One of the few recordings that we still have of him was a time that he ministered at my father's church, and he was a guest speaker there, and I can remember that he talked, I can't even remember the subject about which he was preaching, but I can remember this man of upper probably 70s at this point of this recording, a man who was so weak and frail because of the Parkinson's that was attacking his body, had to sit down to preach. And I remember in the midst of his sermon, he quoted this scripture where he said, even if you give a cup of cold water. And as soon as he said it, he broke. And in the middle of his sermon, he says, even if you give a cup of cold water, and he begins to cry. And this man begins to cry. My grandfather, my papa, begins to cry because he is so overwhelmed with the beauty of simple actions, of simple attentiveness, of simple grace and simple generosity, and these simple little moments that may not bend the full arc of history, to use the language we've been dancing around now, but could possibly bend the moment, as vital and important as that is, and your power to bend the moment. What happens when, to pull it back into Shadow of the Vampire, what happens when Murnau is observing these monstrous things, and then because of these monstrous things, what does he care about? He just cares about the product. He doesn't care about the people involved. He doesn't care about anything else. He just cares about the product that he's going to, the moment the film leaves us with, which, following an earlier theory, can be presumed that it's the moment the film and the filmmaker wants us most to reflect on when we look back in the story we've just seen, is a simple close-up shot of him after everything has been captured in frame. The vampire is dead. The rest of the crew that he had with him is now deceased. And he looks back at what he has captured and says, I think we have it. And that's his fun. I think we have it. Like he captured the product that he was after. And one of the things that has bothered me so deeply and that has become such a vital part of my conversations with my brothers and sisters about looking at social trends and political trends and about all of the things that we could get swept up in the social media world and in the conversational world and everything, is I feel it is continuing to be reduced, that the way we get there is as important as where we get.
Yes.
That how we conduct ourselves and the ways in which we get from point A to point B is as important as either of those positions. The way we choose to be in the world, the way we choose to embody or actively not embody the commission that we have been charged with. And I feel like when I think about things like this, Murnau in the film wants to make this stellar, outstanding picture. He wants to make a legendary film. And to do that, he needs to enlist the help of a vampire, because you want reality, you want this verisimilitude, you want the most impactful product you can. So he enlists the help of a vampire, and at the expense, the one moment in the film that gives me chills, I mean, several do in the last 15 minutes, but when Greta, the actress that he has promised to Count Orlok, when she is laying on the bed, she has now been bitten by the vampire. He's got impatient and begun to take her, and she's laying there, and she remembers a moment from earlier in the film where he assured her, this is the role of a lifetime. Like, this is the role that's going to, I forget his exact quote to her, but he basically compels her to say, like, this is the role. This is the one that you were destined for. And that's what she recalls as she's sitting there now, having been victimized by him as a filmmaker and by the vampire that she was promised up to without her knowledge. And I think about the ways in which the people around us, this is where I'm going, and maybe my final statement on the film, and my thoughts on the film. The way the people around us become means to an end,
Yes.
shatters my trust in our ability to understand the gospel. The ways in which people become nothing more than statistics. We've said before on this show that when the policy becomes personal, or when the principle becomes a person, or when the whatever it is, when that becomes a person, then everything changes. When we examine and can see, and the scales fall off of our eyes, and we see the flesh and blood human being. There's another story in the scriptures, so many are just flying through my head right now, but there's another story in the scriptures where the disciples are walking by a man who was born blind, the scriptures say, and they ask one of the most ridiculous questions. They asked Jesus, they said, who sinned that this man was born blind? Did he sin or his parents sin? Which is crazy to me, that they're asking these kind of situations while the man is presumably in some degree of earshot. I mean, he's at least, nearby them. And they're like, so who sinned to cause this? What's the root cause of this? And Jesus dismisses all of that and heals the man. And he says this was done so that the glory of God could show through him. And you can get into all this theological minutia of what that means in the broader spectrum of things. What I'm taking away from it, and how I'm blending it in with this conversation, is Murnau in the film sees people as a product, and there's an end he's chasing. He enlists the aid of a monster, and the rest of the people are merely products to get from point A to point B. The only reason he is mad at Count Orlok when Orlok starts consuming the crew is the setback to the production.
Right.
That's the only reason
Right.
he's mad, is the setback to his production. Now I've got to fly back and I've got to bring somebody else back. Like, that's what he's frustrated about. And as long as you continue to see in your walk of faith, in your journey towards Christ-likeness, as long as you continue to see people as little more than the means to get you from point A and point B, you have missed the point. You have missed the incredibly profound commission with which we have been charged to be the hands and feet of Christ to the people around us. If you are not actively doing that, then I think just faith without works is dead. It is deceased within you and has no vibrant substance.
I keep thinking about our parasite conversation and the distinction between acting like you own the place and owning the place.
Mm-hmm.
And, in this moment in the film, in Shadow of the Vampire, Murnau is acting like he owns the place. This is his set. This is his production. But owning the place, owning the moment, would be defending the defenseless, would be rejecting the monstrous. And,
yes.
You made the comment a minute ago, putting on equal footing, if I'm remembering how you said it correctly, putting on equal footing how we get to where we get. And I don't even know that you would disagree with this really, but I just remember the way you said it made me think of that way. But for me, in these days, I think how you get there matters a great deal more than where you get. Because I reference in the interview with Robin last week the Eugene Peterson quote, "We make the road by walking." And it's you aren't going to get there if it's not how. That's a really weird way to say that. But I don't know, man. I don't know.
Maybe this is just coming to me in real time, that the way you get there will largely inform where you get.
Yeah.
That the way you walk the path may be more vital than the path on which you're walking, and that you may produce a different destination by walking on it in a way that is not in alignment with the spirit in which you were pulled there in the first place. And it's I think it's a valuable consideration for us to simply pay attention to ourselves, pay attention to how we are conducting ourselves. How are we choosing to view other people? You talked about in that antisocial about, some of the biggest problems, or what I hear a lot about social media from some of my friends who have chosen either to exit it entirely or to minimize their usage of it, has said, like, it's not so much what's being discussed, it's how it's being discussed. And I hear that comment frequently, where people say, like, the debate is not the problem. The problem is that we can't debate. We are name-calling and being nasty and sharing memes that so reduce the complexity of the problem and sometimes miss the point entirely. And not exclusively beating up on social media, because I think this tendency can happen in our real face-to-face conversations as well. I think it really just boils down to, in ways that are hard work and that require our direct intentionality, that, how you get there will largely inform where you get. And, maybe you will get that product. Maybe you will, finish that film. I think we have it. But then what, and at what cost? And it's Shadow of the Vampire, man.
I mean, I'm shocked.
Yeah. I want to give respect to what we've discussed, but I feel pretty good about the conversation. Do you have anything that you were waiting to engage with that we haven't already?
There's so much that I don't, partly maybe because I don't practice saying it enough, I don't know, but I think this will resonate with you, but these massive ideas that are less idea, I don't even mean idea in the ephemeral academic sense, and more just like putting on skin ideas. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And having such difficulty because you're unpracticed in the articulation of knowing how to articulate in a real cogent way. Although that is pretty good, these days where for me personally at least, because it is my desire. I don't want to come on here, and I'm trying to be more intentional about that. I don't want to come on here and bash social media trolls and don't find some way to sort of own how these things either have affected me in the past or how I want to move forward for myself. But that notion of ideas as new skin, as new wineskin, even, it's like these. I think if we aren't constantly attempting to be conscious, we will fall into the roles of instigator or monster or oppressor or broadcaster, and not as intercessor and as shield. This even came to me earlier. You made the comment about growing in Christ-likeness. Kind of what I almost want to say to that is like, no, you are Christ-like. Now live out of that. Now walk, right? Like,
right.
And how much any of this still is relevant to the film is a decent question, I suppose. So, no, right now I'm just kind of following right. Brain trains and,
sure, of course,
taking advantage of the opportunity. But no, I'm okay to, kind of rise back up to the surface a little bit.
Sure. I mean, clearly there's so much more that could be said, but I think we can leave it there. And so we'll pivot over into our very specific metric of fear and God for E. Elias Marriage's Shadow of the Vampire, your number 2 favorite horror film of the year 2000. So we're gonna go to the fog meter. For fear, there's some really delightfully macabre imagery in this film, and in many ways, the final 15 to 20 minutes is quite harrowing and distressing in a lot of ways. So I'm gonna give it a 6 on the fear measurement. What would you say?
For fear, until this most recent viewing, I would have said it was a pretty low fear rating, just because I do find so much affection for the darkly comic aspects of it, but
yeah,
for purely how much that last 15 minutes or so spawned an insanely deeper than maybe is warranted conversation, all rooted in the kind of fearful aspects at work. I will give I think 6 is safe. I think that feels appropriate.
Okay.
And so I will partner with you there, buddy.
Yeah. What would you say for the God measurement?
Well, yeah. And so that is what prompted me to pull my punch on the fear factor, because I think I am, startlingly newly aware of how much is going on in this, or at least what it sparked in me. So for the God meter, I think an 8 is not unfair. Yeah. So I'm gonna go with an 8.
You know what? You partnered with me on my 6. I'm going to partner with you on your 8. I think that's really fair, because the fact is, this film for us has clearly prompted a lot of post-viewing thoughts, and I want to be sensitive to the fact that we bring a lot to the conversation of our own perspective and of our own recent histories and our own sort of thoughts being framed in that. But a lot of what we've talked about is, it is text of the film. It is not subtext. It is text of the film, that he has coerced these elements to produce a film, and that is his ultimate goal, to the destruction of many of those around him. So that is the text of the film. I'm going to join you in your 8.
I like it. So by our powers combined here, what we are resulting in is a 7 on the fog meter for Shadow of the Vampire, which feels
that's great. That feels right.
Appropriate.
Yeah, sure does.
It is nice to revisit these older films and be like, no, there really is something there. Final Destination. I am not looking at you. Reed, you already mentioned it, but just to reiterate, next week we will be diving in, putting on our stupid bunny suits, as it were, and jumping into Richard Kelly's Jake Gyllenhaal and Maggie Gyllenhaal co-starring Donnie Darko from 2001. Any final thoughts on Shadow of the Vampire? We do want people to go vote.
Yes, please, by all means, go and vote for the rest of the surveys so that we can keep the pattern and the rhythm of this year going on. The surveys will start shutting down as the episodes are airing, so do go vote for, at present, as of this recording, 2002 through 2008 are still awake. So go ahead and vote on your favorite horror films of those years. And then we will see you next week for a conversation about Donnie Darko and your top 10 favorite horror films of the year 2001. Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I will say about Shadow of the Vampire, just in passing, it is not available digitally, as we've said, but so worth the extra additional effort for you to seek it out from your local video store or your local library. So please, by all means,
I think partly because we're still swimming in the depths here, but we didn't even ask, do we recommend it?
Oh my gosh, yes, we didn't. Yes. I definitely wholeheartedly recommend it. It has got some mature moments, but is remarkably accessible, and is, as Nathan has said before, remarkably brief as well. It is a very short film and briskly paced. It is definitely worth your time. And unlike Shadow of the Vampire, Donnie Darko is readily available in a number of ways digitally. If, spoiler alert, you are tempted to check out the director's cut, spoiler alert, do not. Watch the theatrical cut. We'll explain more when we visit that film next week. But Nathan, again, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And listeners, as you know by now, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. So in the spirit of that, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. Thank you all for listening. We'll
see you next week, guys.
Next week. Bye.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. Start by visiting thefearofgodpodcast.com for all the latest episodes and news, as well as for merchandise and how to contact us. You can follow us on Twitter @thefearofgod, on Instagram @fearofgodpodcast, or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. Special thanks to Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com for our artwork, to Lee Wright and Reed Lackey for our theme music, and to Tyler Smith and morethanonelesson.com for making our show possible. Lastly, be sure to subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, and if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating and a review. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.